The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as James stood at his usual position by the grand iron gates. For 12 long years, this had been his world, the same spot, the same uniform, the same routine that never seemed to change. But James didn't mind. In fact, he took great pride in what he did. Every morning at 6 sharp, James would arrive at the palace gates. He would check his uniform one last time, making sure every button was polished and every crease was perfect. His boots shined like mirrors, reflecting the early morning light. The red fabric of his ceremonial coat was pristine, without a single thread out of place. This wasn't just a job for James, it was his calling. The tourists loved him. Every day, hundreds of people from all around the world would come to see the famous guards. They would take pictures, try to make him smile, and sometimes even tell jokes. But James never broke character. He stood tall and straight, his eyes focused ahead, his face showing no emotion. This wasn't because he was unfriendly or rude. It was because he understood the importance of his role. "Look at that guard," a little boy whispered to his mother. As they walked past, "He's like a statue. Do you think he's even real?" James heard this comment almost every day. Children were always amazed by how still he could stand. Sometimes they would wave at him, hoping for a reaction. Other times, they would make funny faces or dance around in front of him. But James remained focused on his duty. His colleagues respected him greatly. In the guard quarters, they often talked about James's dedication. "I've never seen anyone take this job as seriously as he does," said his supervisor during one of their meetings. 12 years, and he's never been late, never complained, and never broken protocol. But what people didn't know was that James came from a military family. His father had served in the army for 30 years. His grandfather had fought in wars and earned medals for bravery. When James was growing up, his father always told him that serving your country was the highest honor a person could have. "Son," his father would say, "it doesn't matter if you're fighting on a battlefield or standing guard at a palace. What matters is that you do your job with pride and respect. You represent something bigger than yourself." These words stayed with James throughout his career. Even when the job got boring or when tourists were rude, he remembered his father's advice. He wasn't just standing there for no reason. He was protecting history, tradition, and the royal family. The palace itself was magnificent. The building had stood for hundreds of years, and James felt honored to be part of its story. Every stone, every window, every door had witnessed important moments in history. Kings and queens had walked through these halls, important decisions that changed. The world had been made within these walls. James knew every detail about the palace. He could tell you which window belonged to which room, how many steps led to the main entrance, and even where the smallest decorative elements were placed. During his breaks, he would sometimes walk around the grounds, admiring the beautiful gardens and impressive architecture. The other guards often asked him why he never got tired of the same routine. "Don't you want to do something else?" they would say. 12 years is a long time to stand in the same spot. But James always gave the same answer. "This isn't just standing around. We're guardians of something special. Every day, thousands of people come here to see a piece of living history. We're part of that history." The training to become a royal guard was not easy. James had spent months learning proper posture, ceremonial movements, and security protocols. He had studied the history of the monarchy, learned about potential threats, and practiced staying perfectly still for hours at a time. Many people tried to become guards, but only a few were chosen. On busy days, the crowds could be overwhelming. Sometimes there were so many tourists that James could barely see past them. People would push and shove to get better pictures. They would shout questions at him, even though they knew he wouldn't answer. Some visitors were respectful and quiet, while others were loud and demanding. James had seen it all over the years. He had watched marriage proposals happen right in front of him. He had seen children take their first steps on the palace grounds. He had witnessed emotional reunions between family members who had traveled from far away to visit. All of these moments happened while he stood guard, silent and watchful. There were also difficult days. Sometimes protesters would gather outside the gates, shouting about various political issues. Other times, people would try to climb the fence or cause disruptions. James and his fellow guards were trained to handle these situations calmly and professionally. The weather didn't matter to James. Whether it was raining, snowing, or blazing hot, he remained at his post. His uniform was designed to handle different weather conditions, but comfort was never the priority. Duty came first, always. During quieter moments, James would think about his family. His wife understood the importance of his job, even though it meant he worked long hours and weekends. His children were proud to tell their friends that their father was a royal guard. Sometimes they would visit him at work, waving from behind the crowd barriers. The palace tourists came from everywhere. James had heard dozens of different languages during his 12 years of service. He had seen traditional clothing from countries he couldn't even name. Some visitors were wealthy and arrived in expensive cars, while others had saved for years just to afford the trip to see the palace. What amazed James was how the palace brought people together. Strangers would stand side by side, all looking at the same building with wonder and excitement. Children from different countries would play together while their parents took pictures. The palace was like a magnet that attracted people from all walks of life. James's morning routine never changed. He would arrive early, check in with the security team, review any special instructions for the day, and then take his position. The changing of the guard ceremony happened at specific times, and James took part in this tradition with great pride. As the morning progressed on this particular day, James noticed the usual mix of tourists gathering. Some carried large cameras. Others had guidebooks, and many were simply enjoying the beautiful architecture. He had no idea that this day would be different from all the others. The autumn air was crisp and clear. The leaves on the nearby trees were changing colors, creating a beautiful backdrop for the palace. James felt grateful to have such a meaningful job in such a beautiful place. Little did he know that in just a few hours, everything would change in a way he never could have imagined. Around midday, when the sun was at its highest point, the usual crowd of tourists was buzzing around the palace gates. James stood in his familiar position, watching the steady stream of visitors who came to admire the historic building. The day had been peaceful so far, with families taking photos and tour guides explaining the palace's rich history to their groups. Then something caught his attention. A woman was walking toward the gates with quick, determined steps. She was dressed in expensive clothes, a designer coat, high heels that clicked loudly on the pavement, and a large handbag that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. Her phone was pressed against her ear, and she was speaking loudly enough that people around her could hear every word. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she was saying into her phone. "I don't have time for this nonsense. Do you understand who you're dealing with here?" James noticed that other tourists were starting to stare. The woman's voice was getting louder and more aggressive with each step. She was cutting through the crowd without any regard for the people around her, pushing past families with small children and elderly visitors who were trying to enjoy their day. "I need to speak to someone in charge immediately," she continued, shouting into her phone. "I don't care what the normal procedures are. Normal procedures don't apply to people like me." As she got closer to the gates, James could see that she looked frustrated and angry. Her face was red and her eyes had a wild look that suggested she was extremely upset about something. But instead of handling her emotions privately, she was making her problems everyone else's concern. The woman ended her phone call with a sharp, "We'll see about that," and shoved the phone into her expensive handbag. Then she marched straight up to James, completely ignoring the barrier that separated the public from the guard area. "You there," she said, pointing directly at James. "I need immediate access to the palace grounds. I have urgent business that cannot wait." James remained in his position, following the protocols he had learned during his training. He kept his eyes forward and his expression neutral. The woman was clearly upset, but he had dealt with demanding visitors before. Usually a calm and respectful explanation of the rules was enough to resolve any confusion. "Excuse me," she said again, this time stepping even closer. "I'm talking to you. Don't you dare ignore me." When James still didn't respond in the way she expected, the woman's anger reached a new level. "This is completely unacceptable," she shouted. "Do you have any idea who I am? I have connections that could end your career with a single phone call." The crowd of tourists was now watching the scene unfold. Parents pulled their children closer, and people started taking out their phones to record what was happening. Everyone could sense that the situation was getting out of control. James finally spoke, using the calm and professional tone he had been trained to use in difficult situations. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but I need to explain our visitor policies. If you'd like to arrange a tour of the palace, there are proper channels and advance booking requirements that everyone must follow." "Proper channels?" the woman shrieked. "I don't have time for proper channels. I need access now, and you're going to give it to me." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't authorize immediate access without following security protocols," James replied. Patiently. "These rules exist for everyone's safety and are applied equally to all visitors." The woman's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "Equal treatment? Do you think I'm just another tourist? I have more money in my bank account than you'll see in your entire lifetime. I know people in government positions who could have you fired before dinner time." James continued to remain calm, even though the woman's words were becoming more hurtful and personal. He had been trained to handle verbal abuse without reacting emotionally. "Ma'am, I understand you're frustrated, but these policies come from the highest levels of security. I don't have the authority to make exceptions." "Don't give me excuses about authority," she snapped. "You're nothing but a servant in a fancy costume. Your job is to serve people like me, not to lecture me about rules and policies." The crowd was getting larger as more people noticed the confrontation. Some tourists looked uncomfortable and tried to move away, while others seemed fascinated by the drama unfolding in front of them. Children were asking their parents what was happening, and tour guides were trying to keep their groups focused on the palace itself. Then, without any warning, the woman raised her expensive handbag high in the air. The bag was large and heavy, filled with whatever items wealthy women carry around. Before anyone could react, she swung it hard across James's face. The sound of the impact echoed across the courtyard. James stumbled backward, his hand instinctively going to his cheek where the bag had struck him. The metal clasp on the handbag had left a small cut, and he could feel blood starting to form. The crowd gasped in shock. Several people screamed, and at least a dozen phones were now recording the incident. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. A visitor had actually physically attacked a royal guard. "Maybe now you'll take me seriously," the woman said, breathing heavily from her outburst. "I didn't want to do that, but you left me no choice." When people don't listen to reason, sometimes you have to get their attention in other ways. James stood there for a moment, touching his injured face and trying to process what had just happened. In 12 years of service, he had never been physically attacked by a visitor. He had dealt with protesters, drunk tourists, and people having mental health crises, but nothing like this. The other guards stationed nearby had seen the incident and were already moving toward the scene. They were prepared to arrest the woman immediately and call for police backup. This kind of assault on a royal guard was a serious crime that could result in significant jail time, but something unexpected happened. Instead of calling for backup or having the woman arrested, James did something that surprised everyone present. He raised his hand to signal his fellow guards to wait. Then he slowly began removing his ceremonial gloves, his movements deliberate and careful. The woman seemed to think she had won some kind of victory. "Finally," she said with satisfaction. "I knew you'd see reason eventually. Now, about that access to the palace... But James wasn't preparing to help her get into the palace. He was preparing to do something that would shock everyone watching, including his fellow guards who thought they knew exactly how their colleague would handle this unprecedented situation. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Some people expected James to lose his temper and retaliate. Others thought he would immediately call for the woman's arrest. But no one predicted what was actually about to unfold in the next few moments. The entire courtyard fell silent as James finished removing his white ceremonial gloves. Everyone expected him to either call for security or react with anger after being struck by the woman's handbag. The cut on his cheek was still bleeding, slightly, and there was a red mark where the heavy bag had made contact with his face, but instead of doing what everyone anticipated, James did something that would be talked about for years to come. He folded his gloves carefully and placed them in his pocket. Then, with the same calm dignity he had shown throughout his 12-year career, he stepped forward toward the woman. His fellow guards watched in amazement. They had their hands ready to call for backup, expecting James to give them the signal to arrest the woman immediately. The tourists held their phones steady, still recording, but now they were capturing something completely different from what they thought they would see. James looked directly at the woman for the first time since the incident began. His expression wasn't angry or threatening. Instead, his eyes showed something that caught everyone off guard, genuine concern and compassion. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice so gentle that people in the crowd had to strain to hear him. "You seem very distressed about something. I can see that you're in pain, and I'm wondering if there's something serious troubling you that's causing this behavior." The woman blinked in confusion. This was clearly not the response she had expected. She had just struck a royal guard in front of dozens of witnesses, and instead of facing immediate consequences, she was being spoken to with kindness and understanding. What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice losing some of its earlier aggression. "I'm not in pain. I'm just trying to get the help I need, and you people keep putting obstacles in my way." James nodded slowly, as if he was really listening to what she was saying. "I understand that you need help with something important. But striking someone isn't usually how people handle frustration unless they're dealing with something much bigger and more frightening than a simple visit to the palace." The crowd was completely captivated by this unexpected turn of events. Parents who had been pulling their children away were now staying to watch. Tour guides had stopped their presentations entirely. Even the other royal guards were staring in disbelief at their colleague's response. "You don't know anything about my situation," the woman said, but her voice was quieter now, and some of the anger was being replaced by something else, vulnerability. "You're absolutely right," James replied. "I don't know what you're going through, but I've been standing at these gates for 12 years, and I've learned that when someone reacts this strongly to a simple conversation about visitor policies, it usually means they're carrying a much heavier burden than most people realize." The woman's hand started to shake slightly. She looked around at all the people watching and seemed to realize for the first time how many phones were pointed in her direction. But instead of becoming more defensive, something in James's gentle approach was causing her carefully constructed armor to crack. "I just double quotes," started to say, then stopped herself. "I needed to get inside? I thought maybe if I could just talk to someone important, someone with real authority, they might be able to help me find a solution." James tilted his head slightly, encouraging her to continue. "What kind of solution are you looking for? Maybe there's a way to get you the help you need without breaking any security protocols." The woman looked at the blood on James's cheek, and for the first time since the incident began, she seemed to realize what she had done. Her expression changed from anger to something closer to horror. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. I hit you. I actually hit you." She raised her hand to her mouth, clearly shocked by her own actions. "I've never done anything like that before in my entire life." "I know you haven't," James said gently. "I can tell that this isn't who you normally are. Something has pushed you to a breaking point, and you're trying to find a way to fix something that feels impossible to fix." The woman's eyes started to fill with tears. The crowd watched as this transformation unfolded from an angry, aggressive person demanding special treatment to someone who was clearly struggling with overwhelming emotions. "How did you know?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How could you possibly know that?" James smiled slightly, despite the pain in his cheek. "Because I've seen a lot of people over the years, and I've learned that anger is usually just fear wearing a disguise. And right now, you look like one of the most frightened people I've ever met." One of the tourists in the crowd, an elderly man who had been watching the entire scene, started to applaud quietly. Soon others joined in. They weren't applauding the violence that had occurred, but rather the incredible grace and wisdom that James was showing in response to it. The woman noticed the applause and looked around at the faces in the crowd. Instead of judgment and condemnation, she saw something she hadn't expected: understanding and even admiration for the way James was handling the situation. "I don't deserve this kindness," she said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Not after what I just did to you." "Everyone deserves kindness, especially when they're at their lowest point," James replied. "The question isn't whether you deserve it. The question is whether accepting it might help you find a better way to solve whatever problem brought you here in the first place." His fellow guards were still standing nearby, ready to intervene if necessary, but they were also learning something important about their colleague. They had always respected James for his dedication and professionalism, but now they were seeing a depth of character and wisdom that went far beyond following protocol. The woman took a deep breath and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't even know where to begin," she said. "Everything is falling apart, and I thought maybe if I could just get someone important to listen to me, they might be able to help. But I realize now how foolish that sounds." "It doesn't sound foolish at all," James assured her. "When we're desperate, we reach for any possibility that might offer hope. But maybe there are other ways to get the help you need, ways that don't require breaking rules or hurting people." The woman nodded slowly, seeming to consider his words. The crowd continued to watch in respectful silence, many of them recording what had become an extraordinary lesson in human compassion and conflict resolution. "Would you be willing to tell me what's really going on?" James asked. "Maybe together we can figure out a better approach to whatever challenge you're facing." And with that simple question, the woman's last defenses crumbled completely, setting the stage for a revelation that would explain everything and touch the hearts of everyone present. The woman stood there for several long moments, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to find the words to explain her situation. The crowd remained respectfully quiet, sensing that something deeply personal and important was about to be shared. James waited patiently, his kind expression encouraging her to take all the time she needed. "My daughter," she finally whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "It's about my daughter." James nodded gently, encouraging her to continue. He could see that whatever was happening with her daughter was the source of all her desperate behavior, an overwhelming fear. "She's only 16 years old," the woman continued, her hands shaking as she spoke. 3 weeks ago, she collapsed at school during her soccer practice. At first, the doctors thought it was just exhaustion or dehydration. But when they ran more tests—" She paused, unable to continue for a moment as fresh tears began to flow. The crowd watched in complete silence, many people feeling their own hearts breaking as they witnessed this mother's anguish. "They found something wrong with her heart," she managed to say. "It's a rare condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. The doctor said that if she doesn't get specialized treatment soon, she could die without any warning." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Many of the parents present instinctively moved closer to their own children, imagining how they would feel if they received such devastating news. James felt his own heart sink as he began to understand the depth of this woman's desperation. "That must be absolutely terrifying for you," he said softly. "I can't even imagine how frightening it would be to receive that kind of diagnosis for your child. The worst part is that there's a surgeon in London who specializes in this exact condition," the woman continued. "He's performed this type of surgery dozens of times, and his success rate is incredible. But his waiting list is months long, and the private treatment costs more money than I could ever hope to have." She wiped her eyes and looked directly at James. "I thought maybe if I could somehow get the attention of someone with real influence, someone connected to important people, they might be able to help me find a way to get my daughter the treatment she needs faster." The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together for everyone watching. This wasn't a story about an entitled woman demanding special treatment for selfish reasons. This was a desperate mother who was watching her child's life hang in the balance, while bureaucracy and financial barriers stood in the way of potentially life-saving treatment. "I know how crazy it sounds now," she said, her voice filled with shame and regret. "I know that coming here and demanding to see important people was completely unrealistic. But I've been calling hospitals, insurance companies, and medical foundations for weeks, and everyone keeps telling me the same thing. There's nothing they can do to speed up the process." James could see the exhaustion in her eyes. This was clearly a woman who hadn't been sleeping, who had been spending every waking moment trying to find a solution to an impossible situation. "When I got here today and you started talking about protocols and procedures, something just snapped inside me," she admitted. "All I could think about was how my daughter might not have time for protocols and procedures. Every day that passes is another day closer to something terrible happening." The woman looked around at all the people who were listening to her story. "I'm not usually like this," she said to the crowd. "I work as a teacher at a local primary school. I've never raised my voice at anyone, let alone hit someone. But when your child's life is in danger, you start feeling like you're capable of anything if it might help save them." Several people in the crowd were now crying themselves, moved by the raw emotion and desperation in the mother's voice. Many of them were parents who could easily imagine themselves in the same situation, willing to do anything, no matter how out of character, if it meant saving their child. James stepped slightly closer to the woman, his expression full of compassion and understanding. "What's your daughter's name?" he asked gently. "Her name is Lily," the woman replied, a small smile appearing on her face for the first time since the incident began. "She's the most amazing person you could ever meet. She's kind, funny, incredibly smart, and she has dreams of becoming a veterinarian someday. She loves animals more than anything in the world." "Lily sounds wonderful," James said sincerely. "And it's clear how much you love her. The fact that you're fighting so hard to help her shows what an incredible mother you are." The woman shook her head. "I don't feel like an incredible mother right now. I feel like I'm failing her. Every door I try to open gets slammed shut. Every person I talk to gives me the same disappointing answers. And now I've made everything worse by behaving like a complete fool and hurting an innocent person who was just doing his job." "You haven't made anything worse," James assured her. "You're dealing with every parent's worst nightmare, and you're doing everything you can think of to help your daughter. That takes tremendous courage, even if some of your approaches haven't been the most effective." The woman looked at the cut on James's cheek, which had stopped bleeding but was still visible. "I'm so incredibly sorry for hitting you," she said. "There's no excuse for what I did. I was so consumed by fear and frustration that I completely lost control of myself." "I accept your apology," James replied without hesitation. "And I want you to know that I don't think less of you because of what happened. Fear makes all of us capable of actions we never thought possible." One of the tourists in the crowd, a middle-aged woman, stepped forward slightly. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. "I couldn't help but overhear your story, and I wanted you to know that my brother is a cardiologist at Great Ormond Street Hospital. I don't know if he can help with your daughter's specific condition, but I'd be happy to give you his contact information." The mother's eyes widened with surprise and hope. "You would do that for me, even after watching me behave so terribly?" Course," the woman replied. "You're a mother fighting for her child. Anyone who's ever been a parent understands that desperation." Other people in the crowd began speaking up as well. Someone else mentioned knowing a medical social worker who specialized in finding funding for expensive treatments. Another person said they worked for a charity that helped families navigate complex medical situations. James watched this spontaneous outpouring of support with amazement. His simple act of showing compassion to someone in crisis had opened the door for an entire community of strangers to come together and offer help to a family in need. "This is incredible," the mother said, looking around at all the people who were offering assistance. I came here today feeling completely alone and hopeless, and now ... Now you're not alone anymore, James finished for her. Sometimes the help we need comes from the most unexpected places and in the most unexpected ways. As the crowd continued to offer support and contact information to the worried mother, James made a decision that would go far beyond anything required by his job as a Royal Guard. While his shift wasn't scheduled to end for another 3 hours, he knew that this situation was more important than following his usual routine. James approached his supervisor, who had been watching the entire incident unfold from a distance. "Sir, I'd like to request permission to use my break time to help this woman get connected with some resources that might be able to assist her daughter." His supervisor looked surprised. In all his years of managing Royal Guards, he had never had someone make such an unusual request. "James, you've already handled this situation with remarkable professionalism. You don't need to get personally involved beyond what you've already done." "I understand that, sir," James replied respectfully. "But I have some contacts from my military service days who work in medical advocacy and crisis intervention. If there's even a small chance that I could help connect this family with the right people, I feel like I have to try." The supervisor studied James's face, seeing the genuine determination and compassion in his eyes. "This is highly irregular," he said slowly. "But given the exceptional circumstances and the way you've handled everything so far, I'll allow it. You have 1 hour." James thanked his supervisor and returned to where the mother was still talking with various members of the crowd who were offering their assistance. She had pulled out her phone and was carefully writing down contact information and advice from the kind strangers who had been moved by her story. "Ma'am," James said gently, approaching her again, "I have some additional resources that might be helpful for your daughter's situation. If you're willing, I'd like to spend my break helping you make some phone calls to people who specialize in exactly the kind of challenge you're facing." The woman looked at him with disbelief. "You want to help me even more after everything that's happened?" "Especially after everything that's happened," James replied. "I have a daughter too, and I can't imagine how I would cope if I were in your position. If I can use my connections to help another parent get the medical care their child needs, then that's exactly what I want to do with my time." The mother's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than despair. "I don't know how I could ever repay such kindness." "You don't need to repay anything," James assured her. "Sometimes we're put in situations where we have the opportunity to help each other, and this feels like one of those times." James led the woman to a quiet area near the palace grounds, where they could make phone calls without the noise and distraction of the crowd. The tourists who had been watching continued to follow the story, many of them staying longer than they had originally planned because they were so invested in seeing how things would turn out. The first call James made was to a military chaplain he had served with years earlier, who now worked with families in crisis situations. "Hello, Michael? It's James from the Palace Guard. I have a situation here where a mother needs help navigating the medical system for her daughter who has a serious heart condition." The chaplain listened as James explained the situation, and within minutes, he had provided several contacts for organizations that specialized in helping families find funding and expedited treatment for rare medical conditions. The second call was to a veterans support organization that James had volunteered with during his free time. Many of the people who worked there had experience with complex bureaucratic systems and knew how to find resources that weren't widely advertised. "James, this sounds like exactly the kind of case where our medical advocacy team could make a real difference," said the coordinator he spoke with. "Have the mother call this number within the next hour, and we'll start working on her case immediately." As James made call after call, the mother watched in amazement. Each conversation opened up new possibilities and connected her with people who had the knowledge and experience to help navigate the complicated world of specialized medical treatment. One of the most promising connections came through a contact who worked with a foundation that specifically helped children with heart conditions. "We have emergency funding available for exactly this type of situation," the foundation representative told James over the phone. If the mother can get the proper medical documentation to us within 48 hours, we might be able to cover a significant portion of the treatment costs. The woman couldn't believe what she was hearing. "This is more progress than I've made in 3 weeks of trying on my own," she said to James. "How are you able to reach all these helpful people so quickly?" "Sometimes it's not about what you know, but who you know," James replied. "I've been fortunate to work with many people over the years who dedicate their lives to helping others. It turns out that when you connect the right people with the right resources, amazing things can happen." While James continued making calls, several of the tourists who had witnessed the earlier incident started sharing the story on social media. They posted videos of James's compassionate response to the assault, along with explanations of the mother's desperate situation and her daughter's medical needs. The social media posts began to spread rapidly as people shared the story with their friends and family members. Comments poured in from people around the world who were moved by both the mother's plight and James's extraordinary response to being attacked. Within just 1 hour, James had connected the mother with 5 different organizations that could potentially help with her daughter's treatment. He had also arranged for her to speak with 2 medical social workers who specialized in cases involving rare heart conditions in children. "I've written down all the contact information and the specific things each person wants you to bring when you call them," James told her, handing over several pages of carefully organized notes. "The most important thing is to follow up with each of these contacts within the next 24 hours while the case is fresh in their minds." The mother looked at the detailed notes James had prepared for her. "You've given me more hope in 1 hour than I've had since this nightmare began," she said. "I feel like for the first time in weeks, there might actually be a path forward for helping my daughter." "There's definitely a path forward," James assured her. "It might not be easy, and it will require a lot of phone calls and paperwork, but you're not facing this alone anymore. You have an entire team of people who are now working to help your daughter get the treatment she needs." As James prepared to return to his duties, the mother reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. "Please, let me give you something for all the time and effort you've put into helping us." James shook his head firmly. "I can't accept any payment for this. Helping your family isn't something I did for money, it's something I did because it was the right thing to do." "Then how can I possibly thank you for everything you've done?" the mother asked. James smiled. "The best way you can thank me is by getting your daughter the help she needs and then finding ways to help other families who might face similar challenges in the future. That's how kindness really multiplies, when the people who receive help go on to help others." Within hours of the incident at the palace gates, something remarkable began to happen across social media platforms around the world. The tourists who had witnessed James's extraordinary response to being assaulted had shared their videos and photos, but the story that emerged wasn't about violence or entitlement. It was about compassion, understanding, and the power of human kindness in the face of crisis. The first video to go viral was posted by a young woman who had been visiting London with her family. She had captured the entire interaction on her phone, from the moment the desperate mother struck James with her handbag through his gentle response and the revelation about her daughter's medical condition. "I came to London expecting to see some historic buildings and take some photos," she wrote in her post. "Instead, I witnessed one of the most beautiful examples of human compassion I've ever seen. This royal guard could have had this woman arrested, but instead he chose to see her pain and respond with kindness. This is what real strength looks like." The video was shared thousands of times within the first few hours. People from all over the world began commenting on the post, expressing their admiration for James's response and their sympathy for the mother's desperate situation. But what happened next was even more extraordinary. Instead of just watching and commenting, people began to take action. Someone had managed to identify the specific heart condition that the daughter was facing, and medical professionals started sharing information about treatment options and resources in the comments section. A cardiologist from Australia commented with detailed information about the latest surgical techniques for treating hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. A nurse from Canada shared links to foundations that provided financial assistance for families dealing with rare medical conditions. A medical social worker from the United States offered to help coordinate care between different specialists. The story was picked up by local news stations in London, then by national networks, and eventually by international media outlets. But unlike many viral stories that focus on conflict and controversy, this one highlighted the best aspects of human nature: compassion, community support, and the willingness of strangers to help someone in need. A television reporter who covered the story interviewed several of the tourists who had witnessed the incident. "I've never seen anything like it," said an elderly man who had been visiting the palace with his grandchildren. The guard had every right to be angry and call for this woman's arrest. Instead, he treated her with more kindness and understanding than I've seen from most people in situations far less challenging. The mother, whose name was revealed to be Catherine, agreed to be interviewed by several news outlets. She spoke openly about her daughter Lily's condition and the desperate measures she had taken to try to find help. "I'm not proud of how I behaved that day," Catherine said during one interview. "Hitting that guard was completely wrong, and there's no excuse for it. But his response taught me something important about how we can choose to react when someone is at their worst moment. He saw past my terrible behavior and recognized that I was a mother in crisis." The interviews with Catherine provided more details about Lily's condition and the challenges the family was facing. Lily had been a healthy, active teenager until the day she collapsed during soccer practice. The diagnosis had come as a complete shock to the family, and the complex medical system had felt overwhelming and impossible to navigate. "The hardest part wasn't just learning about the condition," Catherine explained. "It was feeling like we were completely alone and that no one could help us find a way to get Lily the treatment she needed quickly enough. When you're told that your child's life is in danger, every day feels like it could be too late." As Catherine's story spread, something incredible began to happen. Donations started pouring in from people around the world who had been moved by the family's situation. Someone set up an online fundraising page for Lily's medical expenses, and within 48 hours, it had raised more money than the family had thought possible, but the financial support was just the beginning. Medical professionals from around the world began reaching out with offers of assistance. A renowned cardiac surgeon in London, who had seen the story on the news, contacted Catherine directly to offer a consultation for Lily. "I've been following your daughter's story," the surgeon told Catherine during their phone conversation. "I'd like to examine her case personally and see if we can move her up on the treatment schedule. No family should have to wait months for potentially life-saving surgery." The foundation that James had connected Catherine with also reached out with good news. "We've reviewed the documentation you provided, and we're prepared to cover 80% of the treatment costs," the foundation representative told her. "Combined with the donations that have been raised through the online fundraising, this should eliminate the financial barriers to getting your daughter the care she needs." Hospital administrators who had initially told Catherine that nothing could be done to expedite Lily's treatment began calling with different messages. The public attention around the case had motivated several institutions to review their policies and find ways to prioritize urgent cases like Lily's. "It's amazing how quickly things can change when people come together to support a cause," said one hospital administrator who had been working to find an earlier surgery date for Lily. "This case has reminded all of us why we went into healthcare in the first place, to help people when they need it most." The story also inspired other families facing similar medical challenges to speak out about their experiences. Support groups formed on social media where parents could share resources and encourage each other through difficult treatment processes. Mental health professionals praised the way the incident had been handled, noting that James's response was a textbook example of de-escalation and compassionate crisis intervention. "What this guard demonstrated is something we try to teach all first responders and people who work with the public," said a crisis counselor who had seen the videos. "When someone is acting aggressively or irrationally, it's often because they're experiencing overwhelming fear or pain. Responding with empathy instead of force can completely transform the situation. Educational institutions began using the incident as a case study in conflict resolution courses. The video of James's response became a teaching tool for showing how compassion and understanding can be more powerful than authority and punishment. James himself was overwhelmed by the attention the story was receiving. He had simply done what felt right in the moment, never imagining that his response would inspire such a widespread outpouring of support for Catherine's family. "I never expected any of this," James said when asked about the global response to his actions. "I was just trying to help a mother who was clearly in pain." The fact that it led to so many other people offering help and support shows how much good there is in the world when we give people the opportunity to show their compassion. The palace administration, initially concerned about the security implications of the incident, ultimately praised James for his handling of the situation. "His response exemplified the best values of public service," said a spokesperson. "He turned a potential crisis into an opportunity for healing and community support." 3 months after the incident at the palace gates, Catherine found herself walking back toward the same spot where her life had changed forever. But this time, everything was different. She wasn't alone. Walking beside her was her 16-year-old daughter, Lily. Healthy and smiling after successful heart surgery that had saved her life, the surgery had taken place just 6 weeks after that fateful day when Catherine had struck the royal guard in desperation. Thanks to the incredible chain of events that followed James's compassionate response, Lily had been able to receive treatment from one of Europe's leading cardiac specialists, and the procedure had been a complete success. "Are you nervous about seeing him again?" Lily asked her mother as they approached the palace gates. She had heard the full story of what had happened, including the part about her mother's behavior that day, and she wanted to make sure Catherine was comfortable with this return visit. "A little nervous, but mostly grateful," Catherine replied. "Honestly, I've been thinking about this moment for weeks. I need to apologize properly and thank him for everything that happened because of his kindness." As they got closer to the gates, Catherine could see James standing in his familiar position. He looked exactly the same as he had 3 months earlier, tall, dignified, and perfectly professional in his ceremonial uniform. The cut on his face from her handbag had healed completely, leaving no visible trace of that difficult day. There was a moderate crowd of tourists around the gates, as there always was, but Catherine and Lily waited patiently for a quiet moment when they could approach without causing a scene. Catherine had contacted the palace administration beforehand to let them know about her planned visit, and they had given permission for her to briefly speak with James during his duty hours. When there was finally a break in the crowd, Catherine and Lily walked up to the gate area. James recognized Catherine immediately, and a small smile appeared on his face, the first time most tourists had ever seen a royal guard show any expression while on duty. "Hello?" Catherine said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't know if you remember me, but I'm the woman who—" "Of course I remember you," James interrupted gently. "And this must be Lily. How are you feeling, young lady?" Lily stepped forward with a bright smile. "I'm feeling wonderful, thanks to you," she said. "My mom told me everything about what happened here and how you helped us when we needed it most." Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she looked at her healthy daughter standing next to the man whose compassion had made her recovery possible. "I came here today because I needed to apologize properly for my behavior that day," she said. "What I did was completely inexcusable, and I've regretted it every single day since." "You don't need to apologize again," James replied kindly. "You were a frightened mother trying to save her child. I understood that then, and I understand it now, but I also came to thank you," Catherine continued. "Not just for forgiving me, but for everything that happened after. The connections you made, the resources you shared, the way you turned my worst moment into the beginning of our miracle. I can never fully express how grateful I am." Lily pulled a small wrapped package from her backpack. "We brought you something," she said, offering it to James. "It's not much, but we wanted you to have something to remember us by." James accepted the gift with surprise. "You really didn't need to bring me anything," he said, Seeing you both healthy and happy is the only gift I need. Please open it, Lily insisted with a teenage girl's enthusiasm. James carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a beautiful photo frame containing a picture of Lily in her soccer uniform, holding a certificate that proclaimed her Player of the Month for her school team. Next to it was a handwritten note that read, "To James, thank you for helping me get back on the field. Because of your kindness, I can chase my dreams again. Love, Lily." "This is wonderful," James said, genuinely moved by the thoughtful gift. "I'm so proud of how well you're doing." "The doctors say her heart is stronger now than it was before the surgery," Catherine explained. "She's been cleared to play soccer again, and she's even thinking about trying out for the regional team next year." A small crowd of tourists had gathered around them, recognizing this as something special. Many of them had phones out, but this time they were recording a joyful reunion rather than a crisis situation. "There's something else I want you to know," Catherine said to James. "This experience taught me so much about compassion and community support that I've started volunteering with a foundation that helps other families navigate medical crises. I'm using everything I learned from our situation to help other parents who are facing the same kind of fear and confusion I was dealing with." James's face lit up with genuine pleasure at hearing this news. "That's incredible," he said. "I can't think of a better way to honor what you've been through than by helping other families avoid some of the struggles you faced. I've been able to help 3 families so far get connected with the right resources and support systems," Catherine continued. "Each time I see a parent who's overwhelmed and desperate, I remember how you saw past my terrible behavior to the frightened mother underneath. It reminds me to look for the pain behind people's actions instead of just judging their behavior," Lily chimed in with excitement. "And I've been volunteering too. I help other kids who are scared about having heart surgery. I tell them about my experience and show them that they can get through it and come out even stronger." The tourists who were listening to this conversation began to applaud spontaneously. Many of them were wiping away tears as they witnessed this beautiful conclusion to a story that had touched hearts around the world. "This is exactly what I hoped would happen," James said to both Catherine and Lily. "I hope that the kindness you received would inspire you to show kindness to others. That's how we make the world a better place, one person helping another, who then goes on to help someone else." Catherine reached into her purse and pulled out a letter. "This is from the hospital where Lily had her surgery," she said. "They wanted me to give it to you personally." James opened the letter and read it quietly. It was a formal thank you from the medical team, acknowledging that his intervention had been crucial in getting Lily the timely treatment she needed. The letter also mentioned that the publicity around the case had led to increased funding for their pediatric cardiac program, which would help many more children in the future. "Your compassion created ripples that are still spreading," Catherine told James. "Not only did you save my daughter's life, but you've helped create a support system that will save other children's lives too." As their conversation continued, more people gathered to watch and listen. Some of the tourists recognized the story from the viral videos they had seen months earlier. Others were learning about it for the first time, but they could sense the deep emotional significance of what they were witnessing. "I want you to know that I think about that day often," James told Catherine. "Not because I regret how I handled it, but because it reminded me why I love this job. Yes, I'm here to protect the palace and maintain traditions, but sometimes the most important thing I can do is simply treat people with kindness and understanding." The reunion lasted about 20 minutes, with Catherine and Lily sharing updates about their lives and James asking questions about Lily's recovery and future plans. When it was time for them to leave, both mother and daughter hugged James, something that would normally be strictly against protocol, but which felt completely appropriate given the circumstances. As they walked away from the palace gates, Catherine and Lily both felt a sense of closure and completion. They had come full circle from that day of crisis and desperation to this moment of gratitude and healing. And James returned to his duties with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that sometimes The most important service he could provide had nothing to do with ceremony or security, and everything to do with human compassion. 1 year after the incident that changed everything, James found himself standing in front of a room filled with police officers, security personnel, and crisis intervention specialists. He had been invited to speak at a national conference on conflict resolution and community policing, sharing the lessons learned from his experience at the palace gates. When someone strikes you in the face while you're just trying to do your job, James began his presentation. Your first instinct is probably not to ask them what's wrong in their life. But sometimes our first instincts aren't the ones that lead to the best outcomes. The audience listened intently as James walked them through the events of that day, explaining his thought process and the training that had helped him recognize the difference between genuine aggression and desperate behavior driven by fear. The most important thing I learned, he continued, is that behind every act of anger or violence, there's usually a person in pain. That doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but understanding the source of that pain can help us respond in ways that actually solve problems instead of just punishing them. After his presentation, James was approached by dozens of people who wanted to share their own stories and ask questions about de-escalation techniques. A police sergeant from Manchester told him about a similar situation she had handled using James's approach. A school security officer described how he had started asking, "What's wrong?" instead of immediately calling for backup. When students became aggressive, James's supervisor at the palace had been among those who recommended him for speaking engagements. James has always been an exceptional guard, he told the conference organizers, but his handling of this incident showed a level of wisdom and compassion that goes far beyond normal training. He's become a role model for how public servants can turn crisis moments into opportunities for healing. The recognition James received was gratifying, but what meant even more to him was the ongoing relationship he had developed with Catherine and Lily. They had stayed in touch throughout the year, sharing updates about Lily's continued recovery and Catherine's volunteer work with medical advocacy organizations. Catherine had become something of a specialist in helping families navigate the complex world of pediatric cardiac care. She had developed a network of contacts across the medical community and had successfully helped more than 20 families get the support and treatment their children needed. I never imagined that the worst day of my life would lead to the most meaningful work I've ever done, Catherine told James during one of their regular phone conversations. Every time I help another family avoid the fear and confusion I experienced, I'm reminded of how your kindness changed everything for us. Lily had not only returned to soccer but had indeed made the regional team, just as she had hoped. She had also started a blog about living with heart conditions, which had become a source of support and information for other young people facing similar challenges. I get letters from kids all over the world, Lily told James proudly. Some of them are scared about upcoming surgeries, others are dealing with activity restrictions, and some are just trying to understand what it means to have a heart condition. I love being able to help them feel less alone. The foundation that had helped fund Lily's surgery had asked Catherine to join their board of directors, recognizing her unique perspective as both a parent who had navigated the system and someone with practical experience helping other families. Catherine brings something special to our work, explained the foundation's director. She understands the emotional and practical challenges families face, and she has an incredible ability to connect with parents who are in crisis. Her insight has helped us improve our programs and reach more families who need our support. The viral videos of James's response to the incident had continued to circulate throughout the year, often resurfacing whenever people needed reminders about the power of compassion and understanding. The story had been featured in training materials for various organizations, from hospital security teams to customer service departments. A major university had even created a case study based on the incident for their conflict resolution program. This case perfectly illustrates how empathy and de-escalation can transform potentially volatile situations, explained the professor who developed the curriculum. Students analyze the incident from multiple perspectives and learn to recognize The signs of someone in crisis versus someone who is genuinely threatening? James had also been invited to work with military veteran support organizations, helping develop programs for guards and security personnel who were transitioning from military service to civilian jobs. His experience showed how military training and crisis assessment could be valuable in non-combat situations. Many veterans have excellent instincts for recognizing when someone is struggling versus when they're genuinely dangerous, James explained to a group of career counselors. We just need to help them translate those skills into civilian contexts where the goal is healing rather than neutralizing threats. The palace administration had been so impressed with the positive publicity generated by James's handling of the incident that they had asked him to help develop new training protocols for all royal guards. The training now included modules on crisis recognition, de-escalation techniques, and community engagement. We realized that our guards interact with thousands of people every day, and sometimes those interactions involve people who are dealing with serious personal crises, explained the head of palace security. James showed us that our guards can be more than just ceremonial figures. They can be positive ambassadors for compassion and understanding. The new training had already proven valuable in several situations where guards had successfully de-escalated tense situations by recognizing signs of distress and responding with empathy rather than authority. But perhaps the most significant lasting impact was seen in the broader community response to crisis situations. Social media was filled with stories of people who had been inspired by James's example to respond differently when encountering others in distress. A teacher in Scotland shared a story about how she had helped a disruptive student by asking what was wrong instead of sending him to detention, discovering that he was dealing with his parents' divorce. A store manager in Wales described how she had turned a confrontation with an angry customer into an opportunity to help someone who had just lost their job. The story of the Royal Guard and the desperate mother became a symbol for a different way of approaching conflict, observed a social psychologist who had studied the incident's impact. It showed people that responding to aggression with curiosity and compassion could lead to better outcomes for everyone involved. As James stood at his post one sunny afternoon, exactly 1 year and 1 day after the original incident, he reflected on how much had changed. He was still performing the same duties, wearing the same uniform, and maintaining the same professional demeanor that had characterized his 12-year career, but now he carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the most important moment in a person's day might be a brief interaction with someone who is struggling. He had learned that his role as a guardian extended beyond protecting buildings and traditions to protecting the dignity and humanity of every person who approached those gates. A family with young children walked past, and one of the little girls waved at James. He maintained his professional composure, but inside he smiled, thinking about all the lives that had been touched by a single moment of choosing compassion over confrontation. The ripples of that choice were still spreading, creating waves of kindness and understanding that would continue long after he retired from his post at the palace gates.